I'm a god.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow?
I'm a god.
There wasn't one today.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop, right along with the movies we discuss. In this season, we're taking a look at Groundhog Day, after day, after day, after day, after day. I'm your host, Bubba Wheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and in this episode, we're discussing Phil's third Groundhog Day that starts at 25 minutes and 21 seconds with Sonny and Cher's I Got You, Babe, and Phil looking rather unsettled at an intact pencil in the nightstand, and ends at 34 minutes and 33 seconds with Phil in a jail cell. Today, my guest is Rob from The Great Escape Minute. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on the show. I love this movie, and I'm really looking forward to having a discussion about these 9 minutes of the movie, Loop 3.
Glad you can be here. But before we get into today's loop, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background with time loop movies. Like, are there any good lesser-known ones, or is this, like most people, like your first time loop movie?
Okay, well, this is a movie, when it came out in 1993, I actually saw it in the theater, and I actually, if I recall correctly, saw it twice in the theater. I think I saw it the day before I saw Jurassic Park, or maybe it was the day after. I saw them back to back when I first saw them, so both of those movies had a large impact on me. I mean, I was 19 at the time, so I really enjoyed both of them. This was my first time loop movie at the time. I've subsequently gone on and seen many movies that deal with time loops, and I've enjoyed most of them. Some of them are a little too kitschy, but a lot of them still try to find new and interesting ways to make their character or characters continue to go through constant time loops. This still remains my favorite out of all of them. I can't really say that any of the others have been able to eclipse it. There's one that comes really close.
So which one? What's that one?
The one that comes really close is Source Code.
Oh yeah,
I love Source Code.
I've heard a lot about that one, and I'm really excited. That's one that I haven't seen myself, and I'm really excited to cover that on a later season of this show.
Yeah, it's a great movie because of the fact that it deals with it's a thriller, and it deals with a terrorist attack, and it deals with a protagonist who doesn't even know why he's reliving all of the every day, or actually 8 minutes. He's reliving 8 minutes each time. Also, that movie is one of my favorites because as a teenager, I loved the show Quantum Leap, which dealt with time travel.
Oh boy.
And yes, oh boy. It actually has a voice cameo by Scott Bakula, and he says, oh boy. Yeah, so it really worked well. But I've seen a lot of other movies, even many that are in genres that I don't normally gravitate towards. I'm not a fan, for instance, of horror movies, but I think it was last year it was recommended to me to see Happy Death Day, and I watched it and I loved it. And then I immediately watched back to back. I watched the sequel. I think the first one is better than the second one because the second one tries to take it in to more extreme areas. But the first one, to me, was a near perfect horror movie that's done in a time loop fashion. There's a movie called Naked.
Yes.
Which is hilarious. It's have you seen it?
I have not seen it, but it has been recommended to me, or not necessarily recommended, but there has been a couple other people that talked about it and said that it was a lot better than they expected it to be.
Yeah, it was so much better than expected. I wouldn't say it's a great movie, but it's just fun, and they really deal with this concept so well. I mean, the fact that they have their protagonist wake up every single time completely naked, and the first thing he has to do is figure out how to get clothes, really works well. And then there were 2 TV shows that I used to like that dealt with time loop scenarios. One of them is True Calling, which is most of the time she was just reliving the same day once, but there were times where she relived it similar times. It was about this woman who works in a morgue that has to try and figure out how to save the people before they die.
Yeah, I've definitely heard about that one, and I'm actually surprised that my wife hasn't discovered it, because she usually gravitates towards actresses, and then she'll go back and watch everything that an actress does, and she's a big fan of, and she likes Eliza Dushku, so I'm surprised that she hasn't tracked that show down yet. Let's go ahead and dig into today's loop here in Groundhog Day, and I think it's interesting that it really, unlike a lot of the previous loops, I mean, this is only the third repetition right now, but the music really gives a very disturbing vibe to the day right off the bat.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, you see as soon as he wakes up that he just, day 2, he was like, all right, maybe I dreamt it. Now it's day 3, something's very strange going on.
Yes, this is the moment where he's like starting to be scared. Like even whenever he sits up out of the bed, it's like he's waking up from a nightmare.
Yes. I mean, I like the way that they did the continuity between the last loop and this loop. The whole idea with the pencil, where he puts the pencil in, he breaks the pencil, puts it in one place, but when he wakes up the next morning, and I never thought about it until I saw it this time. What's her name? He finds the pencil complete, but he runs into one problem with the fact that the pencil is not in the same place that it was before.
Yeah, so whenever he breaks the pencil, he sets it on top of the alarm clock. And then whenever he looks for it the next morning, he reaches his hand on top of the alarm clock and it's not there. And then he reaches just off screen down below, and that's where he picks it up, and that's where he originally picked it up from the previous day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just great the way that they do that. That they thought about the fact that the pencil will not be in the same spot. They need to basically clear everything completely back to the way it was beforehand, and they do a great job with it here.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting that this is the part of the time loop story where he's really starting to be afraid about he doesn't know what's going on, and he doesn't know what to do about it. This is him, rushing through the day. The first time around, it takes him about 10 minutes of screen time. The second time around, it takes him about 7 minutes of screen time. And then in this, the third time, he goes through all of, what I've referred to as the milestones. He speeds through them in just a minute and a half this time around.
Right, but then they give us a lot of extra stuff that's fun to see.
Right.
Yeah, he feels, you can see that he's very agitated about everything that's going on, and that's why he's rushing through things. He's maybe he's saying to himself, okay, the faster I get through this, the faster the next day can begin. That February 3rd will begin.
And even though he's rushing, I noticed that it seems like he still arrives at Gobbler's Knob at the same time that he did the previous days whenever he was going at a leisurely pace.
Yeah, as you know, I rewatched the whole movie today, and every time, whenever he always leaves the bed and breakfast at the exact same time, so he always comes to the exact same spot. It doesn't matter how much time he tries to do beforehand. You're right, but everything is going on. So it's actually very funny thinking about it, because he's trying to rush things, but time is still telling him, okay, you want to rush things, but it's all going to still go at the same pace that we want it to go to.
Right. It's almost like I'm curious thinking about it now that I wonder if these events actually are taking place at different times. He's trying to rush through the day, so he gets there earlier, but they're actually these certain events are actually tied to Phil, because he rushes. That makes everything else go faster, so they still meet him at the exact same time, even though he's maybe getting there maybe 10 minutes earlier.
Okay, that would make sense, but if you think about it, he still only has the 24 hours.
Yeah, I am that. That's something that, because something that I have started looking for. We don't really see a whole lot of clocks in the movie, and the clocks that we do see, I just noticed don't actually work.
None of the clocks work.
Except for the alarm clock.
Well, which only goes from 5:59 to 6. And there are a few times when you do see it that it's, I think there's one point where it's 4:30 in the morning. I think right before he breaks the pencil, we can see that it's
Yes,
I think
it's
4 something.
right. It's yesterday's minute.
Yeah,
It's 4:04, and then it flips to 4:05.
you're right. That's the only clock. I mean, I actually read that none of the clocks in the diner or any place are actually working.
Yeah, and I noticed that, and giving a little behind the scenes, episodes that are coming up later, but I have recorded them already. I noticed that 4 o'clock or 5 clocks that we can see behind Phil in the diner. The two on the
Yes.
bottom are both stuck at 11:30. The clock right above that is stuck at 4 o'clock, and the one just above that is stuck at just before 9. And I noticed it this time, but I didn't notice it previous times. You can't actually see the second hand on the bottom 2 clocks, and you can see that the second hands are not moving.
On the bottom 2 clocks, it actually looks like one of them says 11:30 and one of them actually says 5 to 6, because it looks like it's the small hand is on the 6, not the large hand.
Yeah,
Which is even more fascinating if they're the exact opposites of one another.
Right. And then there's also one more clock that's halfway off screen, and you can't see either of the hands. So they're both above, between 9 and 3 on the top half of the clock. Also, in today's loop, we see him at the therapist's office, and we can see his watch. But I wasn't able to make out any hands. Like, at least at the quality that I'm watching, which I'm watching on my computer, which I believe is pulled from the DVD. But I was not able to clearly see any hands on his watch.
Right. When I'm looking at that, it looks as if it might be the same as everything else, where it's either 5 to 6 or 11:30. That's the way it looks to me. It could be that I'm just imagining that, because as you said, it is a little bit blurry, so it's hard to tell.
It's hard to get a read on how the day flows, because this is like a time loop, and there are different ways to look at how he spends his day. We know that, at least at the diner, that this is only his third repetition of Groundhog Day, because he actually says, "This is my third time doing it." But,
Yeah.
We get...
No, he says, "I've done it twice."
Yeah. We see him do several things, and I think different people could split it different ways. I personally, I think it's conceivable that he did everything that I've lumped into this day all in one day. Because, he's got the weather report, which is like about 7:30, because we do get a time attached to that scene whenever he reads the Groundhog declaration in the scroll. That does have the time there at the beginning.
Yes.
The diner, we would assume, would be somewhere between mid-morning and lunch. And then I think you could conceivably, go see a neurologist, get an x-ray. That would take an hour or two. And then see a psychiatrist in the late afternoon, like maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then go to the bowling alley at night. Yeah.
The psychologist basically says that he doesn't have very many clients, so it shouldn't be that difficult to get an appointment.
Right.
Especially if you have the neurologist call up and say, "All right, I have someone that I want to send over to you. Do you have any time free?" And he'll be like, "All right, well, of course I do." I'm dealing with, he mentions that he has, does couples counseling mostly.
He's got couples and one alcoholic.
One alcoholic, exactly. Which I wonder if that alcoholic is either Gus or Ralph.
Yeah, it could be. And then, of course, all that takes place in the evening time. So, personally, I think it's all conceivable that this is all within one single day.
Yeah, it also flows. It flows well as one particular day. Because basically you have the point where she actually suggests that he go to see a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as Rita says that, so then he goes to the doctor, and then the doctor says, "You need to go see a psychologist." And then, then immediately after he finishes at the psychologist, then we see him in the bowling alley, and it's nighttime. So it all makes sense that one happens after the other.
Right.
It doesn't need to be. We don't need to pretend or think that it's a different day. It just makes sense that it all just flows properly into one day.
I did want to back up, and there were a few details that I noticed this time around. And I talked about this yesterday, where she actually got a speaking role. As soon as he walks out of the bed and breakfast in the morning, we get to see the piano teacher just walking across the street. And
yeah, that's actually something I wanted to mention also, that I love the fact that this movie takes characters who we meet later on and puts them in earlier scenes in the background. You have the same thing with Nancy. You can see Nancy numerous times before he actually approaches Nancy.
Right. Including in this
And
minute.
also same thing with Gus and Ralph. You see them before he interacts with them.
Yeah, I did want to comment. I am very curious about her wardrobe choice in general, because she's wearing cowboy boots, the long coats,
the red bag,
the longer, like the knee-high skirt, and then she's wearing the cowboy boots, which it doesn't seem to make sense with what little we know about her personality. I'm not like an expert on matching and outfits, but looking at it, more closely, I feel like that's a really mismatched outfit in general.
Well, mismatched color-wise or mismatched
everything
style-wise? No, because color-wise, she's wearing a jacket above whatever she's wearing. We don't know what color her shirt is. Her shirt might be a color that goes with the blue skirt. And the black boots.
They're like the dark brown, like the dark brown leather cowboy boots. But they have like the wide V, like they look like stereotypical cowboy boots. I guess maybe it's kind of like almost like a school marm vibe to it.
Well, isn't that what she's supposed to be? Because she is a piano teacher, and we see how she acts later on.
I guess but I don't know. It was just one of those little things that stood out to me. After watching this loop several times, that it just stood out, and I had to point it out.
Okay, that makes sense.
As much as I love Ned, and I noticed this yesterday too, I feel like Phil's interaction with Ned feels feels less and less natural, and it feels more forced to me whenever, like, as I'm looking at this very closely. I think the first time around, it felt very natural, like he's obnoxious, but the conversation flows.
But he's also nostalgic.
Yeah. And it's a combination of like reminiscing and trying to get Phil to remember him, moved into the insurance pitch, and then the second day it's compressed, but he still hits all the talking points just a lot more quickly. And then this one, it feels just super compressed and does not feel natural at all. I think especially in this one, it feels less like a real conversation and more like a movie conversation.
Okay, that is definitely, it makes sense. But first of all, I've always loved Stephen Tobolowsky.
Yeah, Tobolowsky.
Tobolowsky, yeah. I mean, I loved him in Sneakers, and he was also great in Spaceballs. He's a character actor who's been in a lot of movies in very small roles, sometimes very memorable, like this one. I like his interaction here because, as you said, it maybe only the first time sounds genuine, but it helps with the comic aspect of the whole movie. The fact that this caricature shows up every single day, and all he's trying to do is get Phil to remember him and be able to sell Phil insurance. It's a combination of both of those together.
And I think it's funny too that in each time, like whenever he says Ryerson, he takes off his hat.
Yes,
it's me, Ned.
Ned
takes off
Ned
his hat.
Ryerson.
Ryerson.
Which is really funny because you would think that he's taking off his hat to show him his head of hair, to help him remember who he is. But apparently, he's completely bald here, so therefore, when he would have known him in high school, he hopefully wasn't completely bald at the time. So that wouldn't really. Maybe it's the idea that the hat might be somewhat concealing parts of his face. So he wants to take his hat off in order to be able to show him that who he is. I'm Ned, even though you don't. I mean, he said that he dated his Phil's sister, and Phil has no clue who he is.
Yeah, and he does mention his sister again later on in this loop, whenever he's rattling off the things that you're supposed to do, where he's like,
Yes.
Be a man, be nice to your sister.
Exactly. And be nice, I guess, to the guy taking your sister to the prom. Maybe. I mean, one of the things I liked about this particular loop is you see not only is he rushed, but he's also more disheveled. He doesn't do his tie properly. His shirt is unbuttoned a little bit. So I think in subsequent loops, you actually start to see that he's not wearing a tie at certain points. And I don't know if you've noticed this. I mean, it's not directly connected just to this loop, but he has a different tie in every single day also.
No, I haven't noticed that yet.
It's a slightly different color each time. It's possible that he does reuse certain ties, but you can distinctly see that there are different ties that he's wearing.
It is somewhat interesting because you know that he would have to have, a very limited wardrobe because he was only expecting to be here for one day. So he would just pack an overnight bag. But I could see him having, a variety of ties because they don't take up very much space. And also that would be one thing where, whenever he wakes up the next morning, he would pick a tie, like whichever tie is like called out to him. Like, yeah, today I'll pick this one.
Right. Depends on his mood of that particular day.
And the weather, of course.
Of course. But you also have to take into consideration, well, the weather's going to be the same every day.
But, I mean, his thought process for packing it originally.
Right. Exactly. But one of the things that always gets me is the fact that why does it take him an hour and a half from when he gets ready till he gets to Gobbler's Knob? He needs to get Gobbler's Knob at 7:30. So why is he always getting up at 6? What is he doing in the morning that takes him an hour and a half to get ready?
Yeah, and I would imagine, it's pretty close, but I would anticipate that it's probably like a 10 to 15 minute walk from the bed and breakfast to Gobbler's Knob.
That you'd probably have to go back and ask Todd about what happened, about the filming locations. But, and I've never been to Puxatawny, so I couldn't tell you the actual distance between them. I don't even know do you know the distance between Puxatawny and Pittsburgh?
It's about an hour and a half drive. And I do notice, this is set in Punxsutawney, but it was filmed in Woodstock. But jumping ahead in today's loop, one other little detail that I noticed that I thought was interesting was whenever they're all coming out of the bowling alley, you can just barely see the sign that's next to the bowling alley, and it actually does say Punxsutawney Resale Shop. Because since they filmed it in Woodstock, that would be a sign that the filmmakers would have put up, so that it says Punxsutawney Resale Shop instead of... There is a Woodstock Jewelers, since it is filmed in Woodstock, but they did go to the trouble to change the sign so it says Punxsutawney Resale Shop, even though you can only just barely see it.
Yeah, that's true. I see what you're talking about there. Now, did you notice what's written on Rick Duckerman's shirt, Gus?
Yeah, he's got his Punxsutawney Phil T-shirt. And not only that, but it actually looks like it's something that he's had for a few years because he got a couple of the holes right around the neck, just below the neck.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. And did you notice in the bowling alley, there's a big sign that says now forming fall leagues?
No, I missed.
This takes place in February.
Right.
They're already forming the fall leagues in February. Or it could be that they just never took the sign down from the previous summer.
Yeah, it could be either way, because the tag on their car also says December of '92. If you think that this takes place in February of '92, then that would fit. But if it's supposed to take place in February of '93, then they're a couple months behind on renewing their license plate sticker.
Okay, but that I would actually say makes sense with Gus and Ralph,
right?
That they didn't renew their sticker. That is plausible here. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things I mean, we're jumping back and forth in this loop. Hopefully, that's what you want to be doing. I love the fact that Harold Ramis gives himself a cameo here as the neurologist.
He mentioned that there's no spots, no lesions, but he's just looking at an X-ray, and it's very difficult to find those brain abnormalities in an X-ray unless they're
Correct.
extraordinarily severe.
Or unless you're a former Ghostbuster. But it could be that he's, you also can see that he has put on a considerable amount of weight since he played Egon.
Yeah.
Who was thin as a rail, and
I definitely did notice that.
He's a little ballooned up here, which is fine. I mean, it shows the passage of time after 9 years since Ghostbusters. It would make sense, or it would be plausible.
And there's not really a whole lot to the neurologist scene, but it is unusual that it's the blizzard that he is like the impetus for him saying, "Oh yes, the quote-unquote blizzard that's coming," despite the fact that there really is a blizzard there. That's like the one part of his story that's actually the most plausible. But that's what the neurologist picks up on as the most unbelievable part, that because of the blizzard, that's why he should go see a psychiatrist.
Well, because nobody will believe the fact that there could be a blizzard, because if he was watching the news and he saw Phil doing the news the day before, that blizzard's just going to miss them and go right down tuna. So apparently Phil is not the only weatherman who believed that at the time.
Let's see, jumping back a little bit more again, I do want to talk some more about the diner scene in general, because I think taking this back to time loop movies in general, this is another important scene in that context, because this is the first time where he tries to convince somebody that he's in a time loop.
Yes.
And
it's interesting his choice. The fact that he chooses that he wants to tell this to Rita.
Yes.
Why does he choose her? That's the question.
Well, I think it does make sense, because even though he's been to Punxsutawney 4 years in a row, he's never really introduced himself to anybody in previous years. He's just kept to himself. The only person that he really knows is Larry and Rita. And clearly he's not going to go to Larry, because he has an extremely low opinion of Larry.
Correct, but he doesn't know Rita at all. He knows that she likes bloody sausages, that's it.
Yeah, but she is in a position of authority in his context, because she is his boss to a certain extent. She is a producer. So I think it does make sense, even before you get to his apparently latent feelings for Rita. Even ignoring all of that, I think it does make sense that she would be the first person that he would go to with this.
Right. Okay. No, because I was thinking more from the perspective of why would he go to a stranger? But you bring up a good point that everyone's a stranger to him here, at this point at least, except for Larry. Larry's the only person who's not a stranger that's located in Punxsutawney, and since he doesn't think very much of Larry, and as we know, Larry doesn't think much of him. That's a conversation that really wouldn't go over well.
Right.
So maybe he thinks that because she's from the big city, and she's not this small town hick, as a bad Phil would think of everybody in this town. So maybe then he thinks that she'll have a more open mind to thinking, to taking in what he says.
Right, and almost surprisingly, he skips the point where he has any evidence to prove to her that he's repeating the same day over and over, because he skips past even doing the weather report, because that would at least give him some ammunition. Instead, he takes them to a completely new situation, and so this is something that he hasn't done in the previous 2 days.
Yes, he's broken the chain of events, basically.
Right, and so
maybe in his mind doing that is going to help him get out of this loop. or wake up from this nightmare or dream, however he's looking at it at this point. I think it's a dream that's starting to turn into a nightmare in his mind.
Right, and that's enforced by like we talked about, the music that starts this off. I also think it's interesting that I just realized that this is where the movie is basically showing that Phil is completely helpless and he is completely relying on everybody else around him. Because the first person that he goes to is Rita, who, like I mentioned, she's in a position of power, and she tells him that you need some serious mental help. And so he follows that basically to the letter and goes to see a neurologist. The neurologist tells him you should see a psychiatrist, so he goes to see a psychiatrist. And then after that, he goes to the bowling alley and he talked to the two morons, as he called them whenever he saw them at the cafe. And once they get in the car, he asked them what would they do if there was no tomorrow. And they say that there's no consequences and we can do whatever he wants. And he follows their advice as well. Despite the fact that he calls them morons, he still takes their advice practically word for word.
That's one of the things I wanted to actually discuss, the fact that he has a very low opinion of both Gus and Ralph, but the wisdom that they impart on him is basically what puts him on the path of trying to decide how to live his life throughout all of these loops, at least for at least half of the movie, the way it does. And first you have Gus looking at the glass of beer and talking about whether it's half empty or half full. Not something that you would expect a moron to have an intelligent conversation about. And he brings up the whole philosophical aspect of it is, how are you looking at life? Do you look at life as it's half full or as half empty? And then, when they get in the car, as you mentioned.
Well, and also building off of that, basically repeating the same day over and over, and then Ralph is just like, yeah, that's life in a small town, is just repeating the same day over and over again.
Right. Yeah, no, Ralph basically looks at, that's pretty much the way I live my life. You get up, you go to work, you get drunk, and then you go back to sleep, and then the next day just is the same thing, completely. But the fact that he gets this wisdom from Gus, who says, no tomorrow, no consequences, no hangovers, we could do whatever we want, and that just, you see in Phil's mind that it just snaps, and he's like, oh wow, I can actually use this to my advantage, because he is someone who does all he can for himself. And these two quote-unquote morons have actually given him this idea that he can do that now also. Why don't I try and test the limits of, what can happen if you don't have to think about the consequences of tomorrow.
Right, and
so I really like the way they did that.
Yeah, and you can almost even just see him light up whenever he says, we can do whatever we want.
Exactly. Now, one of the things also I like about the fact is they never really bring Gus and Ralph back. You have them, you have Gus's, the scream that he makes, whenever the tray falls and stuff like that. But he never has another conversation with them throughout the entire movie. So this is their wisdom to impart on him, and then they continue with on their own path, which is, as they've pretty much said themselves, they're living a life of a loop also, but it's a different type of loop. Because their loop is something that if they really want to, they could try and get out of. He can't.
And even though he does have a low expectation of all the people in this town, I think Gus and Ralph he does call them morons, and I think that based on what we see, that is relatively accurate to them. And I think that's why, in terms of the building the structure of the movie, that's why he takes their advice, but that sets him on the wrong path. And it's not until he starts listening to someone who is smarter and more well-intentioned that puts him on the right path. And I think
Yeah.
it does make sense in that respect that we do move away from the Gus and Ralph philosophy.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I wanted to also mention the fact about when they're driving on the train tracks. The timing is great. The way that you see them, driving directly towards the train, and I think Ralph says, "Oh yeah, the train's gonna swerve."
Oh, that's
And then
Phil says. I think he's going to swerve.
is it Phil who says it? Yeah, right. I didn't
Yeah,
remember
it's
which
Phil
one
that says it because the two drunks they're almost like scared sober at that moment.
But it's timed so well that he gets exactly to the junction to turn off.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a sign on the railroad crossing as the car turns off.
No, I didn't notice that.
So it says caution, frequent train on both tracks. Do not stop on tracks. That's just poor grammar. You wouldn't say frequent train on both tracks.
Oh, and I think that's interesting too because I didn't notice that there were two tracks there. Yeah, I guess I can see them now.
Yes.
But that makes sense for the stunt work that he's probably swerving off from the second track, like the closer track, and then the train is actually on the farther track, which would be safer from a stunt perspective. And I also could. It's difficult. I think it's pretty well done because
no, there's one. You see one track. I mean, there is just one track here. Now, I have a bigger question. You probably recall that right behind them right behind their car is a police car. If they were able to swerve at the last minute, what happened to the police car?
Yeah, that's a good question too. You do see the second track, like whenever they're driving, there is a gap, a several, like they're not right next to each other where they're driving. So I would imagine that they come closer to each other for the street crossing.
Right. Okay, it's possible.
Well, obviously we don't hear like the crash, so I think it's pretty safe to assume that the police car just swerved off earlier. Even though we do see, like, whenever we get the close-up of them, which, at least to my eyes, it's pretty, it's pretty obvious that they're like filming on a stage and they're just pretending, like they're just bouncing themselves up and down. And then you have the stunt drivers whenever you see the wide shots of the actual car.
Yeah, most definitely.
I think it does match up pretty well, just with the speed of the car and the fact that it's a wide shot, and they do match. I feel like I think Ralph in the middle, the stunt performer, because the actor playing Ralph is a pretty skinny guy, and I feel like the stunt performer is a bit bigger. But other than that, I think they.
And it looks like he's wearing a fake beard.
Right, but I think that's fun, and I do think that whatever Bill Murray is doing, the way that he's bouncing up and down and probably like intentionally modulating his voice is a good representation of actually, or at least what you would think would happen if you were driving on the railroad tracks.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think this is one of Bill Murray's best performances, if not the best performance. I mean, I know a lot of people love him in Ghostbusters and Meatballs and Scrooged, and there are people who also like him in some of his dramatic roles that he's done. But I personally believe that this is his best role, and I was a little shocked that he didn't get more love for what he did here.
Yeah, because he does cover a very wide range in this movie, because we do get a lot of comedy, we get a lot of, like, not a ton, but we do get some nice, like, really dramatic moments
Serious
the movie.
moments.
Yeah, serious moments.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call him dramatic.
And I think he covers it all, very well. And Phil has a really great arc in general, going from a person who really just thinks about himself, and not only that, but doesn't really like himself all that much. I think if you look deeper into how he comes across in the first half of the movie, into someone who starts thinking about others, and in doing so makes himself a better person and a person that he can actually like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
I also think it's interesting when he's drinking at the bowling alley. Did you notice that Phil is drinking coffee? He's completely stone cold sober, talking to these two drunks.
Yeah, because they're drinking both whiskey and beer at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually never noticed the fact that he was drinking coffee, but you know that he's not drunk. You can tell that.
Yeah, especially since like earlier and later, he's not shy about, like, whenever he's at the hotel bar, he complains about there not being enough liquor in his drink. But here he's not actually drinking at all.
But it's because he wants sweet vermouth.
But initially it's Jim Beam. Like, he asks
Yeah.
for Jim Beam. And here he's not drinking at all, so he's completely sober throughout all of this whole scene. Do you think that changes the how you feel about how he acts during all this, knowing that he hasn't even been drinking at all? Because it's pretty clear that he's not drunk, but it's not clear that he hasn't been drinking at all.
Right, but he's basically what that tells us is that his decisions that he makes here, whether they're right or wrong, which we know later on they are wrong because they will not give him any form of self-fulfillment. But his decisions are made while he has a clear mind. His mind is not clouded with alcohol.
I will say, like, he does make a lot of decisions, and this puts him on a path of doing just whatever he wants. And I've been asking everybody, we only see like 36 days within the context of the film, but he's clearly spent a lot longer trapped in Groundhog Day. What would you say would be a day that he had to have that didn't make it up into the actual movie that you maybe would have liked to have seen?
I actually gave a lot of thought to this question because I knew you were going to ask it, and I think because we know that Phil is a very intelligent person. He's very self-centered, but he's still intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he would have done is there would be one morning where he would wake up at 6 o'clock, jump in a car, even if he has to steal Larry's van, and then drive to Pittsburgh or drive wherever he wants to, and then we would get to see him experience his day somewhere else, because it's conceivably possible. Because if the blizzard only happens later in the morning, so if he leaves earlier, he could get ahead of the blizzard.
Yeah, and
so that would be interesting to see him somewhere else, for at least just one day, just to see how he, whether it's him going back to Pittsburgh and trying to get back into his regular life, and then going to sleep at night and then waking up back again in Punxsutawney. That would have been even more effective in showing how trapped he is in Punxsutawney. He's not just trapped physically, he can leave the boundaries of Punxsutawney, but at the end of the day, he's going to be back in Punxsutawney.
I do think that's interesting, and I think it's also becoming a bit more fascinating for myself, because I did mention it quickly before, but I've recorded ahead of time already, and I've asked this question several times, and this has already become the most common answer. And
really? I thought it
yes.
was being I thought that was being a little genuine with my answer. Give you something clever that no one else had thought of. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think like out of 6 or 7 people I've asked this to, this is the 5th time somebody's answered in this way, and I am kind of curious that is becoming like a common answer. I'm curious as to why that is, because they did have it in the script where that does happen, and there is a brief montage in the script where he goes, in a car in a different direction each day, and each day he gets stopped by the same blizzard. So it's like Punxsutawney is basically in an eye of a hurricane, except it's like a blizzard hurricane.
Oh wow, that's actually very cool. Yeah, I think you need to tell all your future guests that they can't listen to any episode of the show before they record with you, and then maybe you'll get some more diverse answers. I'd only heard the first episode before we recorded, and I know that Todd didn't say that, so I was hoping that I was coming up with something quite clever and unique, but apparently not.
And then looking back at the movie as a whole, again, we've only seen 36 days, but we do know that Phil is obviously trapped in here much longer, and there's a wide range of theories from people looking at that, anywhere from like 5 years to 10,000 years, how long he actually spends trapped in Groundhog Day throughout the course of the entire movie. So where do you fall on that line?
Okay, well, when I rewatched it today, I was actually trying to keep track of things that will take him a long time. I mean, first of all, he mentions the fact that he's seen the movie in the movie theater when he takes the waitress.
Yeah, Heidi too. Yeah.
Right.
The unnamed
he's
woman.
He's seen it 100 times. Okay.
Over 100 times, yeah.
Over 100 times, which he doesn't say he's seen it over 1,000 times or whatever. So you got to say it's at least 100, because I don't think he spent the day in the movie theater watching it 5 or 6 times or whatever it is. It's possible, but I would give that 100. Then when he's talking about the card trick, flipping the cards into the hat, he says that takes at least 6 months. So that also adds to that. Then he has the piano lessons, which for him to be able to play what he plays at the party at the end, that's something that will take him years to be able to do, in my opinion. And also the whole ice sculpture aspect, which he has to learn at some point. So my guess is he's there at least, I would say anywhere between 10 and 15 years. That would be my guess, if not more. It's still possible, because there's a lot of things that we don't see, and we don't get to get a clear understanding of it. But what this also tells us is, once again, it shows us his phenomenal intelligence and his phenomenal memory. The fact that he's able to recall everything that has happened to him beforehand, that he's still able to go through the entire day. I mean, the fact that when he's in a future loop, when he's sitting and watching the two guards, Felix and I don't remember the other one. It wasn't Oscar, but Felix and somebody, when he steals the money from the truck.
Right.
So he must have sat there numerous times watching them and counting the seconds in order to figure out where the perfect moment is to break in and take the satchel of money where nobody will notice.
But then at the same time, I think that there can be some overlap, because he does have practically 24 hours to play with, because you know that whenever he dies, he wakes up fully intact. So you would imagine,
Yes.
If he stayed up all night, he would wake up fully rested as well, since his body would reset.
Yes. Completely.
So he could, in theory, have those extra nighttime hours to do whatever practicing. And the armored car robbery and the movie is actually in the same day, and there can be overlaps in that. Like, he could have spent
of course
100 days planning the heist, and then afterwards on each of those same days, he would end it by going to see Heidi too.
Right, with apparently subsequently with a different woman. My assumption is he gets very bored of Nancy very quickly, and gets bored of everyone else because he wants Rita. The question is, how many women are there in Puxatawny for him to try to seduce in strange ways by saying that they were in the same English class.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it's somewhere between 10 and 15 years. But there's really no way of us knowing this. It's all guesstimation.
Right.
Even if Harold Ramis, I think Harold Ramis at one point did throw out some sort of number or whatever it is, but it doesn't mean anything because there's no proof of it either way.
Right. I think it's up to the viewer to take away from it.
Yes.
What they think. Just like
right. It's more than 36 days. There's no question about that.
Yeah. That's pretty much all the notes that I have for this loop. Did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I just wanted to bring up one more thing about Phil. You know, the fact that the whole process that he goes throughout this movie, it's an interesting process, and the question is whether it would be something that could work for anybody. You know, the to me the whole message of the movie is do all you can in order to be a good person, no matter how long it takes. You know, because you're going to be more satisfied with yourself when if you're a nicer person, if you're doing good. And you know, you can look at that from a superhero perspective also, because I know you're a superhero fan. But so I think the question is you know, Phil is not an evil person. He's more or less a lonely, cynical person who, throughout the course of this movie, tries to figure out who he really is and what he wants in life. So, I mean, as we mentioned, the first half of the movie, you know, he decides to just completely be free-spirited and do whatever he wants and, you know, not care about what's going to happen because, you know, he's stuck in this. And then he starts to realize that maybe he can use this for good to better himself and to better things around him. You know, I like the arc, but I don't know if it's the type of arc that you could say that you could put any type of character in and say this is going to work for them.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mention it that way because that falls in line very closely with the ideology in the TV show The Good Place.
I've actually never seen it.
It's an enjoyable show, and it does have some elements of time loops within it because the characters do repeat things at certain times. And in the later seasons, potential spoilers for the Good Place, but whenever they're basically redefining how to determine who goes to the good place and who goes to the bad place, they basically devise pretty much a Groundhog's Day-like system where whenever a person dies, they would be put into this simulation, and then they would go through the simulation and try to earn enough points from being good, doing good things for others, just being a good person. And if they were a bad person, then they would get to a point where they would restart it with like a general. They wouldn't have any knowledge of the previous loop, so their memory would be wiped clean, but they would have like just a more general feeling to do better, like a vague memory of what they did so that they could improve on the next loop. And then they would keep improving themselves over each concurrent loop until they got to a point where they deserved their place in the good place.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Have you ever seen the movie Between Two Worlds?
I have not.
Okay, so I'm not going to tell you anything about it. It's a movie from 1946, I believe, if I remember correctly, where it has a very similar theme. And that's all I'm going to tell you about it. I don't know if you like old movies and if it's not a superhero movie or whatever, but it sounds like it's something, it goes along the same type of line. But that's a movie that's great going in completely blind. I saw it for the first time last year and I loved it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's something that I would definitely potentially look into.
Yeah, it's not a time loop. I mean, it's not a time loop movie, but it deals with the whole idea of what you were talking about with The Good Place.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in checking that out. That's pretty much all I had, unless you had anything else that you wanted to bring up.
No, I'm good. I just want to once again say that I love this movie, and I think it's great, and I can't wait to hear what all of your guests are going to say about this movie to enlighten me and all your other listeners as to what's going on.
All right, well, thanks for joining me today. Why don't you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you online?
Okay, well, the same day that this podcast launched last week, my minute-by-minute podcast launched. I'm doing the Great Escape Minute. So if you want, you can go check that out. Our website is thegreatescapeminute.com. Our email address is thegreatminute@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group called The Cooler, and our Twitter account is Great Escape MXM. And if you're interested in seeing any of my movie reviews, you can go to my normal site, MovieRob, and it's movierob.wordpress.com. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of reviews there. I'm closing in on my 8,000th review. So head on over there, check things out if you want.
And as always, I am Bubba Wheat from FlightsTightsAndMovieNights.com, where I have written reviews on a paltry, just over 500 superhero and comic book movies. And you can find this podcast, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. And you can find me on Twitter at Bubba Wheat. But that's one more day, and now there are no more consequences, and I can do whatever I want.
I'm a god. Well, what if there is no tomorrow? I'm a god. There wasn't one today.
No tomorrow. That will mean there will be no consequences. There will be no hangovers. We could do whatever we wanted.